So thank you, everyone. First of all, I am extremely grateful to the Lehman Center for this opportunity. I met wonderful people here, and I discuss many aspects, many subjects of this book with them. So thank you, thank you. A big hug to my friends from Turma do Fundão. I discussed the whole book with them, and I am also obviously to Professor Nathan Plank and also other professors with whom I discussed this book here. So this book, Racial Literacy, Antiracism as an Education for Democracy, tackles the following question. What role schools can play in the construction of a racially inclusive society in Brazil? And this is a relevant question because access to education is a fundamental right in Brazil. It's a universal right, but race discrimination has played a central role in racial discrimination at schools has played a central role in the whole history of the country. So during the monarchic period, for instance, Black people were enslaved people and free people were prohibited from accessing to school. At the same time that Brazilian government were facilitating access to white immigrants to school, to jobs, and to lands, Black people were prohibited from attending schools in Brazil. During the First Republic, Brazilians began to formulate this whole idea of racial democracy, that race has no relevance in this country, but at the same time, there was a constitutional clause stating the net relevance of eugenics as an important parameter for education. Throughout the Brazilian history, have a lot of laws that facilitated access to white persons to education, especially white upper class people, children of our big land owners, etc., to education. But since the political liberalization of the country, this whole thing changed. So Brazil began to implement racially conscious policies, affirmative action, the number of Black people at schools increased considerably, of Black professors, but still we have this whole discussion, or I would say, the lack of discussion about races in schooling, if we need to address this question or not. So there is a growing consensus in Brazil that racism is a structural problem and that affects every single aspect of Brazilian life. And access to education is one of them. And education plays a fundamental role in people's lives. Education is an element of socialization. Education is an important instrument for social mobility. Education is through education that we develop our capacities to operate as competent social agents. But racism is a huge problem in Brazilian schools. There are several researches done by Brazilians and American authors as well, clearly demonstrating that that schools are a profoundly hostile environments to Black people, and specifically to Black male students. So racism is an obstacle to the realization of this fundamental right. So what we can do about it? So what and why exactly there is this extreme resistance to discuss this question? Here in the United States, there are hundreds of studies about racism at schools and how races create all sorts of problems, but this is something that not exists in Brazil. Quite the contrary, any discussions, any attempt to discuss the subject made immediately resistance and many times outright cultural censorship. So what are my research questions? So how exactly race relations affect, how races affect social relations in Brazilian schools? Brazilian teachers know how to address the question of races, something that happens quite frequently, probably every day in the country. So how exactly races operates in the Brazilian schools? It's among the relations among students and professors. Races is how are professors adequately trained to address the question of races. I wrote a book called Recreational Races, and I found dozens and dozens of cases of race discriminations in Brazilian schools, primary schools, universities, and everything. And in many of these cases, professors were the main people discriminating and making racist comments, microaggressions, and sorts of things. So what kind of training Brazilian teachers should have to be prepared to address these questions? And or should be aware that they are actually practicing racism, and which values should inform this kind of training? It's racist only a cultural problem, it's a political problem, it's only a moral problem, In which ways should we examine and address this question of racism? And are schools the adequate place to address the question of race and race relations? So what are my hypotheses? So first of all, racial literacy is a path to equity in schools. So in order to make this constitutional right a reality, we really need to act. We need to implement a series of social policies, and one of them is exactly train teachers, train professors, because we cannot achieve racial equality in Brazil while with this whole situation of schools being such a hostile environment to people. The second hypothesis is that teacher training is a necessary path to racial citizenship, because, of course, as we all know, the schools are primary places of socialization. Literacy, what I call racial literacy here, is a program of political consciousness. So I am addressing racism in this particular book as a political problem. Racism has sociological, moral, legal, but I am addressing racism as a political problem. And specifically, I claim in this book that racism is an obstacle to social civic solidarity. If you want to build a racially inclusive society in Brazil, we need to go back to this very important aspect of political theory, this idea of civic solidarity. Without, being able to see others as equals, we will never have a real democracy in Brazil. Civics or anywhere else. Civic solidarity, it's a means to promote social understanding among various social groups. And civic solidarity, it's also an important way means of self-understanding. Law, politics are not something exterior to us. Law and politics actually provide parameters for self-understanding, to understand who we are, to understand the others, our place in society, how should we treat others. So without a very clear consciousness of how races compromise the whole functioning of democracy, we are not actually going anywhere. So the first chapter of my book discuss the idea of racial literacy. And what is exactly racial literacy, or at least in this particular book? So basically, I use the idea of racial literacy introduced by a critical race scholar called Lenny Guinier. And she defines racial literacy, and many other people after her say the same thing, as a sort of social grammar. So racial literacy is a kind of knowledge that allows people to identify how racism works, how racism produces social disparities, how racism produces stereotypes, inadequate conceptions about the other. Racial literacy also has another important aspect. When we are talking about racial literacy, when we are talking about the construction of a racially inclusive society, we also need to be able to understand racism, how racism operates, but also how to act. So what are we supposed to do as citizens to eliminate race discrimination, the consequences of race discrimination? So again, racial literacy means understanding of social process, but also social action. And this is extremely important for the discussion about racial literacy. The discussion about racial literacy, what kind of training we should give to professors. So racial literacy is a form of race consciousness, okay? In order to discuss questions of justice, we need to address the question of races, sexes, classes, and all other forms of system that produce oppressions in Brazil. In the second chapter, I talk about democracy. What is democracy? And I am particularly interested in some aspects of traditional political theory. First of all, the connections between democracy and collective well-being. So democracy is much more than elections. Democracy is much, much more than a political system in which people go regularly and choose their representatives. Democracy is a political system based on collective decisions of the future of society. Democracy means public morality, and public morality, okay, has one specific important aspect, the recognition of others as equals. And this idea goes back to Aristotle. The Greeks said, well, democracy, if we want this thing to work, we need to train people. Okay, we need to cultivate some virtues, and one of them, the idea of justice. We need to treat people adequately. We need to recognize that other people are also competent social actors, that they have the same quality and same value that we have, because otherwise this is not going to work. It will be just a bunch of people trying to, reach their personal interests and nothing more. So what we call public sphere is a place where equals can discuss the common interests. So democracy means fundamentally civic solidarity, means equality and liberty. Well, in chapter 3, I discuss racism. And this is extremely important because I also work as consultant to implementation of diversity programs. And there are a lot of institutions, law firms, schools, universities, companies, all of them are interested in diversity, in implementing a more racially equal environment, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know from where to start. And the main problem is exactly that they don't know what racism is, how racism operates. So it's important to first recognize that racism is not simply an inadequate perception of the other. Racism is not only animosity. Racism is not only a moral problem. Oh, I don't like you because you're Black, because you're indigenous, you're Indian, or whatever. No, racism is a system of social domination. So racism means that one particular racial group holds power and uses this power to maintain a series of social privileges. Racism has an ideological, a political, and also cultural aspects. It has several manifestations: interpersonal, institutional, structural, cultural, recreational as well. It is important for teachers and for people in general to understand that race is much more than physical traits. Race is a category that we use to classify people, to see if they deserve our respect, our concern, our solidarity or not. So race is fundamentally a way to determine what kind of status people should occupy in a society. So when we are talking about race when I am talking about race in this particular book, I'm not talking about if you are Black or white and everything. Okay, these words I just want to describe. When I'm say when you are Black or white or Asian or Indians and etc., this means that you are socially positioned, that you are occupying certain places in racial hierarchies, in the social hierarchies. In chapter 4, I talk about race discrimination. I begin with the social psychology of race discrimination. There is a huge discussion in Brazil right now about all these racist attacks against Vini Jr., about this Black soccer playing in Brazil. There is a huge discussion about hostile humor and racist humor. So what is the problem with racial jokes? What is the problem with sexist jokes? Well, the problem with all these social ideologies is that they reproduce the idea that Blacks, women, gays, poors are not competent social actors. And this kind of stereotypes, they are not restricted to that particular situation in which I tell a joke or I laugh at a joke. It actually determines the way that you perceive these people and many others in all other situations. So it is important to understand how these stereotypes work, how prejudice works, what is the logic of social stigma, and how, and this is particularly important for us, how these stereotypes are reproduced even in racially neutral conversation and contents and books and educational material, etc. So in this chapter, I talk about direct, indirect, intersectional discrimination. I talk about the purpose of races as a reproduction of racial privileges, and all this content are important because professors really need to understand how the system works. In chapter 5, I talk about racial socialization. So how to train professors to become anti-racist people, how to train professors to engage in the production of racial justice. So what usually happens in Brazil? What happens when a white child says something racist, compares a black kid to a monkey, for instance? First of all, most white professors want to protect their collective identity. So they immediately dismiss as a case of racism. Oh, this is just a joke. Or they treat as a moral problem. Oh, you should not do that. This is very ugly. Oh, you are a Christian. Okay, this is against Christian principles and this sort of thing. And the problem is, this is not a religious question. This is not only a moral question. This is not only a cultural question. This is a political problem as well. Because fundamentally, you are saying to this person that I do not recognize you as a citizen. I do not recognize you as a competent social actor, because I don't think that you have the same form of the same human value that I have. So and it's very difficult for most white persons to understand how racism actually affects people. And this is why I introduced this chapter of racial literacy, because of the question of positionality. So the professor, the white professor, the black professor, the Asian professor, the indigenous professor who want to address these questions really need to understand their role in society. Okay, and it's important to know that racism operates independently of what we do, of how we treat people. Okay, we occupy certain positions because of our race, because of our gender, because of our class, because of our sexual orientation, and we need to understand how my actions and messages and feelings determine the way that I understand myself, and also the way that I treat people. And racism is largely an unconscious form of motivation. Racism determines who I want to be friends with, determines my choices of sexual partners, determines who I want to be as a professor, as a neighbor, determines, when I enter the subway, if I will sit at the side of in this or that place. So it is important to understand that racism means privilege for some people and oppression for other people. And what am I supposed to do about it? What is my role in dismantling and the system of racial oppression, which is also a system of racial privilege? Okay. And of course, when I'm talking about racial socialization, I am not ignoring the fact that racism operates, along with other forms of system of discrimination, mostly sexist. So when there is a huge literature on that, when we examine the question of Black women, in lesser extent of Asian women, and we clearly see how the combination of this process operate to position these people, these groups in a situation of vulnerability. And the sixth and final chapter of the book, well, actually, there are two chapters, one directed to discuss the media, and another one about gestor público.
Civil servant.
Okay. So okay. So what are we going to do with all this discussion about races and about race and everything? So what are we supposed to do in the classroom? A lot of things. So first of all, we need to actually transform how the question of races operates in our schools. I mean, and how we teach, while we train teachers. So what happens, and this is the case of Brazil and the United States, these teachers, professors in general, are not prepared to address the question of races for a variety of reasons, mostly because of cultural censorship, and in the case of Brazil, because of this whole idea of racial democracy. Okay, so people, Black and white people, but especially white people, who are the majority of professors in Brazil, they are trained to deny the social relevance of races in Brazil. We are socialized, with this idea that racism is irrelevant in the country, that white persons are essentially good persons, the whole idea of cordial social relations in Brazil. And this ideology affects the way that schools create and train teachers, affects the way that educational schools train their students. So first of all, we need to implement courses specifically about races and education. And these courses, it's important to demonstrate how the discussion about races is, again, fundamentally a political question. So racism should be addressed in a transversal way. Okay, should be an aspect of, if possible, to all courses of all disciplines of all areas of study. So this is an important aspect. So first of all, it's important to recognize that racism exists. It is important to recognize how racism affects schooling, how affects academic outcomes and the sort of things. So this is the first thing. We need actually to make considerable change in curriculum. And we need to create a curriculum that actually, in which professors would be able to identify, again, it's important to go back to the idea of racial literacy, how racism operates. So I said something that Christina thinks is racist. And why is that? What is the problem with call someone baiano? Oh, só uma baianada, só podia ser uma baianada. What is the problem with that? This is just a joke. Well, not really, because the word baianada is a racialized word. It designates people from a specific part of the country, of a specific state with a majority Black population. Okay, but people use this word all the time and they do not recognize the relevance of the origin or the impact that this kind of of kind of racial stereotype that this word reproduces. So when we talk about racial literacy in this project, first we should talk about politics. So the first thing we need to teach children, first professors, and then children, basic political and legal concepts. Obviously, in an age-adequate way. So what are the meanings of words? For instance, what is a right? What is freedom? What is equality? And it's important to discuss these concepts, these legal, political, and also moral concepts with concrete cases. Okay, so someone was fired from a position because she is a woman, because she is a disabled person. Is this correct? No. And why not? So first we need to discuss, professors, students need to have a very good grasp of basic political and legal concepts, and then we will discuss the question of racism, sexism, and other sorts of oppression. And this is important because children begin, human beings begin to develop moral consciousness when they are, especially when they reach 5, 6 years old. It's when they achieve a certain level of cognitive development, so they can understand more abstract issues. So this is the kind of age when children are able to comprehend and to engage and to understand all moral aspects involved in questions of justice. So, and again, right? So again, first politics, then racism. First, we need to teach professors and children, to facilitate the understanding of civic solidarity. What is the meaning to be a citizen? What is the meaning to why? What do I mean when I say of what is the meaning of equality? Okay, and so if you are treated unfairly, and what was the impact of this unfair treatment on you? Okay, and then we will discuss the question of races and sexes and everything else.
So I just can I interrupt you now?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
You know, second question. So, I mean, I actually did most of my work all my life in politics, so I agree with you. You have to start with politics. But the terms that you have presented to us and sort of the concepts that you regard as foundational for politics are highly contested.
Yes.
Both in the political realm and in the cultural realm.
Yes.
You know, I mean, so to say what is equality, that's a big question, right? And there are different conceptions, or equity is a better example. Equality is easier, but equity is a huge example. What does it mean to have an equitable education system? What is a right? You know, and which rights take precedence over which other rights?
Yes.
And so what's your vision, if you like, of how teachers would instruct students, particularly very young students?
So the third article, Article 3 of the Brazilian Constitution, establishes some important goals for our political system. And one of them is the construction of an equal, solidary, and just society, which means that when we are talking about equality in Brazil, according to our constitution, we are talking not only about formal equality, but about substantive equality. The Brazilian Supreme Court has actually paved the way in this particular to understand this particular aspect when in the affirmative action cases. Okay, so Minister Lewandowski said, when we are talking about constitutional equality, we are not only talking about that I have a right to be treated equally. We are not talking about symmetry. Okay, we are talking about the necessity of recognizing those groups who are in a situation of vulnerability. Equality means equality of results. Equality in the Brazilian Constitution, and in particular, in the philosophy, in the political philosophy that informs the Brazilian Constitution, means that the state should act to promote social inclusion, which obviously also is the case of racial justice, of racial inclusion. So these are definitely very contested issues in the United States, especially in the Supreme Court cases, as you obviously know, but not in Brazil. So Brazilian Constitution, of course, there is also the same debate, but it's very well the idea of social rights, the idea that the state has actually has positive duties, and that one of them is to promote social inclusion of disadvantaged group. It's a very well established thing in Brazil. And the Supreme Court and many federal courts could say that repeatedly. The problem is the role of race. Okay, and the problem is this ongoing influence of the idea of Brazil, the influence of this representation of Brazil as a racial democracy. So in the book, especially in the first and in the second book, I said, what kind of democracy, what democratic project the Brazilian Constitution entails? And it's clearly a pluralist and substantive democratic project. So this is why I insist in this idea of racial literacy as a political, in this political perspective of racial literacy. Please.
Can I add to that? Because would you rather finish?
No. Yeah, I finished.
Okay. So sort of like add on to David's question. I just want, because I'm curious also to hear vision and also maybe how other like countries and systems dealt with that. Because, for example, I feel like the theoretical framework that you gave and the grounding would also work for the law that specified that schools should teach like African and African Brazilian history.
Yes.
Right. But in practice, what happened was there's this, all actors in the system are acting politically. And that means that part of the actors are just not going to teach that. And that's what we see. Not only teachers, sometimes teachers refuse to teach. Sometimes parents will go there and say, this is witchcraft. You're not teaching this to my kid. It becomes a big thing. And they just like, don't teach that. They might, teachers might agree with, all that's there, but they see themselves in a position where they cannot push that because they want to keep like a good relationship to their school community. So I'm also wondering like about your vision of what to do. And I appreciate that you said like it's in the Constitution, it's way clearer than here, for instance, that how the Brazilian legal framework understands these issues. But there are other political projects in Brazil right now, and one of them is really strong, and it's evangelical, and they don't agree with that. Yes. So my question is, in practice, one of the risks is the only schools that will be able to forward such a project are the ones that are more progressive from the get-go. And how do you see how do you see that this could be dealt with?
This is definitely a legitimate question, a legitimate concern. So, Eduardo, I decided to write this book. I published a book last year about anti-racist legal education. And I decided to write that particular book because the vast majority of the Brazilian judicial system is composed, 82% of the Brazilian judges are white heterosexual upper class people who have very little or no contact with Black people. They go to schools where 99% of professors are white. 82% of law professors in Brazil are also white heterosexual upper middle class and upper class males. So people who never suffer discrimination in their lives, and people who are systematically benefited from by discrimination. And they also go to, and these professors, they do not conduct any research on anti-discrimination in general. So I wrote that book because people don't have any idea at our law school how to address the question of race discrimination. And because of that, our judicial system fails all the time, fails to provide adequate legal protection to Black people. And my motivation to write this book is exactly the same. There are now, I just saw yesterday night that there is a book called Antiracist Education. Okay, so, but there are very few books about that. And there are all sorts of problems that you mentioned. But there is another problem that there are no books. There are very few books and articles that address the question. So even if you are a progressive principal, if you are a progressive professor, if you want to engage in anti-racist education, most people don't know what to do. Okay, and even when we read the articles and books about anti-racist education, they have a very thin and sometimes inadequate understanding of what is racism, how racism operates, the distinction between racism and racial discrimination, the impacts of racism. Okay, and so I am not writing this book because I think that everybody will read it, they will agree that I am right, and they will try to implement this model. I am just fundamentally trying to fill in a gap. Okay, I just want to provide some parameters for this discussion. And I recognize, for instance, and especially I want to provide this parameter because of the I always forget the
Oh, yeah, I forget
the lay that implements the obligation of teaching African culture. And it's also because even those schools who actually teach, okay, we will teach a class or we'll organize an event about African history. And I have attended some of them, many of them. I have many nephews, and every time I go there, and it's just a reproduction of racial stereotypes. And not negative racial stereotypes, but it's just that aquela imagem folclórica, I don't know, folclórica, how do you say that?
Yes,
Folkloric of indigenous people, of Black people, of Asian people, and everything. Okay, and it's important in a certain way to talk about Asians, because this whole discussion about racism in schools revolves around Black people. But Asian Brazilians are systematically discriminated as well. Obviously, much less than Black people, much less.
For 1%.
Yes, but there are all sorts of microaggressions. And there's another interesting thing. So when many schools, they have Asian students of Asian descent. So they decided also to do a racial, they discuss race and everything, and they focus exclusively on Japanese Brazilians. So you see, they are so well off, they are a model minority, okay, they are this and they are that. So I think we should not even be discussing the question of racism at all, okay? So it's also a strategy to, to say this is an irrelevant thing, that racism plays no, racism is an irrelevant thing in Brazil, and etc. So, so this is my goal. I don't think that this book will transform.
No, I
just want to establish some direction.
It's quite an ambitious goal, an important and ambitious goal to like give the theoretical backing for that.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I think, yeah, implementation is very hard.
Yeah,
and it's
it
like
is.
another.
But that's the challenge
Yeah.
that it raises for us, right?
Yeah.
So you've laid it out very clearly, and.
And then the next step, yeah,
and-
I think
but
that's
then-
a big
and
project.
It's not
yeah.
fair really to ask you, well, now how do we solve this problem?
Yeah,
But I think I follow faithful at this question all the time, like, so how are we gonna implement your?
And it's interesting because so that you said that, because I wrote a book a couple 4 or 6 years ago. I published a book called Thinking as a Pensando como Negro, Ensaio de Hermenêutica Jurídica, Thinking as a Black Jurist, in which I present this idea of Black hermeneutics. I wrote this book and I thought, nobody will ever publish this book. I publish the book, I will be, it will be a public disgrace because everybody, oh, look at the title of the book, this is already racist and everything. And 4 months later, I was giving a talk to 80 judges, all of them were judges for the fifth federal district court, like all white males. No, there were 2 white women, okay? And I was talking about Black hermeneutics, and they actually read the book. They actually read. No, I want to know, what do you mean by this? I want to know how exactly what should I do in this situation or another? And this book, it was very unusual because I use this technique of storytelling. So the book articulates my personal experience as a Black man and legal theories. So for the first to the last pages, I talk about my life as a Black person in Brazil. And the book was a smashing success. And so a lot of people were very resistant, but when they read, oh, I think we should discuss this. Okay, so we never know what will happen.
No, I think this is always a problem for professors, right? Is that we're very good at sort of diagnosing a problem and sort of specifying what the multiple dimensions of the problem are, but then everyone outside our own world looks to us and says, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah, and this question of race, I mentioned the question of race consciousness. There are a lot of very conservative groups in Brazil, especially evangelical Christians, but there are a lot of people in Brazil and a lot of middle class, upper class, white people, white intellectuals and everything, and who are actually very much engaged, okay, in this discussion of injustice in general. Okay, I work as a diversity consultant, and I see that all the time.